I never imagined that this impromptu weekend in Etretat would change my life forever. It all started with a surprise invitation from my husband, Mark, and his mother, Helene. It was a Thursday evening like any other. I was coming home from work, tired after a long day at the law firm where I have worked for 5 years. I had barely crossed the threshold of our Parisian apartment when Mark greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. "Sarah, my darling. I have a great idea for this weekend," he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mom and I thought we could all go to Etretat. You know, the little coastal town in Normandy that I told you about. It would do us good to get some fresh air, right?" I was surprised, not to say suspicious. Mark wasn't one to suggest spontaneous escapades, and our relationship with Helene was complicated, to say the least. But something in his smile, in the energy that emanated from him, made me hesitate to refuse immediately. "I don't know, Mark," I replied, putting down my bag and taking off my shoes. "It's a bit sudden, isn't it? And I have a lot of work at the moment." That's when Helene came out of the kitchen, an apron around her waist and a spatula in her hand. I hadn't even heard her arrive. "Oh, come on, Sarah," she insisted with a smile that seemed almost sincere. "It'll do us all good. Besides, it's been so long since the three of us spent time together." I felt a pang of irritation rising within me. It was typical of Helene to show up unexpectedly and disrupt our plans. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think that this weekend could be an opportunity to reconnect, to dissipate this tension that had hovered between us for so long. After a moment of hesitation, I finally gave in. "Okay," I sighed, a small smile on my lips. "Why not? It might be nice." Mark's face lit up, and even Helene seemed sincerely delighted. We spent the evening planning our trip, looking for a hotel online and deciding what we were going to do once we got there. Mark's enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself looking forward to this weekend. The next morning we hit the road early. The drive from Paris to Etretat isn't very long, around 2.5 hours, but we wanted to make the most of our day. The road was pleasant, winding through the Normandy countryside. Green fields passed by outside the window, punctuated here and there by peaceful cows and apple trees in bloom. Mark was driving, Helene was sitting in the front, and I was in the back. Strangely, the atmosphere was relaxed. We chatted about everything and nothing, recalling family memories, even laughing at certain anecdotes. It was as if the prospect of this weekend had momentarily erased all our tensions. However, from time to time, I caught furtive glances between Mark and his mother, whispers when they thought I wasn't paying attention. A little voice deep inside me told me something was wrong, but I ignored it, preferring to focus on the positive moments. We arrived in Etretat early in the afternoon. The little coastal town was as charming as Mark had described it to me. The iconic white cliffs stood proudly above the English Channel, and the crisp sea air immediately took my mind off the stress of the week. Our hotel, Le Dormy House, was perched on high ground, offering stunning sea views. It was an old building, full of character, with exposed beams and stone walls. Our room was simple but comfortable, with a large window overlooking the ocean. After settling in, we set out to explore the city. We strolled through the picturesque streets, admired the half-timbered houses typical of the region, and of course, we went to see the famous cliffs. The natural arch of Etretat, sculpted by millions of years of erosion, was truly impressive. Late in the afternoon, we stopped at a small cafe on the Pebble Beach. Sipping a local cider, a Norman specialty that I immediately loved, I found myself thinking that this impromptu getaway was an excellent idea after all. In the evening, we had dinner in a small restaurant recommended by the hotel receptionist. The Normandy cuisine was delicious, fresh oysters from the region, followed by a sea bass fillet with cream and apples. The meal took place in a warm atmosphere, almost as if the tensions of recent months had never existed. However, towards the end of the meal, I again noticed these furtive glances between Mark and Helene. This time I couldn't help but ask, "What's going on, you two? It seems like you share a secret." Mark laughed, perhaps a little too loudly. "But no, darling. We're just happy to be here, that's all." Helene added, "Yes, it's so nice to spend time together, all three of us." I nodded, not entirely convinced, but not wanting to ruin the mood. After all, maybe I was too suspicious, seeing problems where there weren't any. Back at the hotel, exhausted from this day full of emotions and activities, I quickly got ready for the night. Mark offered to go down to the hotel bar for a last drink with his mother, but I declined, preferring to go to bed early. As I slipped under the cool sheets, lulled by the distant sound of the waves, I told myself that perhaps, finally, this weekend would really allow us to start again on new bases. Maybe all my worries were just a figment of my imagination. What I didn't know was that while I was peacefully falling asleep, Mark and Helene were putting a plan in place that would turn my life upside down. In the calm of the Norman night, while I dreamed of white cliffs and blue seas, they were planning a betrayal that I could never have imagined. Sleep quickly overcame me, and I sank into a deep rest, oblivious to the drama that was playing out around me. That night, I had strange dreams, a mixture of happy memories and diffuse anxieties. Somewhere, deep down, maybe my instinct was trying to warn me. But lulled by fatigue and the hope of a new beginning, I was unable to listen to these silent warnings. Tomorrow would be another day, I thought. A day that would perhaps mark the beginning of a new family harmony. If only I had known how wrong I was. The next morning, I woke up to the gentle sound of waves crashing against the cliffs of Etretat. A ray of sunlight filtered through the poorly closed curtains, caressing my face. For a moment, I stood there, still, savoring this moment of peace. The sea air, laden with iodine, filled the room, reminding me that I was far from the hustle and bustle of Paris. Then, slowly, I became aware of the unusual silence in the room. No regular breathing from Mark next to me, no rustling of sheets. I reached out, feeling for the bed, but was met with nothing but emptiness. "Mark!" I called, my voice still hoarse from sleep. No response. I sat up, blinking to adjust to the light. The room was empty. The camp bed that Helene had used the day before was folded up and stored against the wall. Mark and Helene's belongings were no longer there. A wave of worry came over me. Maybe they had come down to breakfast without me. I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. 9:30 a.m. I had slept longer than expected, but it wasn't that late. That's when I noticed the message on my phone screen. A text message from Mark. With my heart pounding, I opened it. "Enjoy your new life, without money or clothes, which, haha." I reread the message once, twice, 3 times. The words danced before my eyes, but I couldn't make sense of them. It was a joke, wasn't it? A bad joke from Mark and Helene. Trembling, I got up. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. My suitcase was missing. I frantically opened the wardrobe, the dresser drawers. Empties. All my clothes, my toiletries, my purse, everything was gone. Panic overwhelmed me. I ran to the bathroom, hoping to find at least my toiletry bag there. Nothing. Even the towel I had used the day before was gone. I returned to the room, panting, desperately trying to understand what was happening. That's when I saw my reflection in the mirror. There I was, standing in the middle of this hotel room, wearing only my pajamas, looking haggard and lost. Reality hit me hard. It wasn't a joke. Mark and Helene had really abandoned me here, with nothing. No money, no clothes, no identity papers. Nothing. Tears began to flow down my cheeks without being able to hold them back. How could they do this to me? For what? What had I done to deserve such treatment? I collapsed on the bed, shaking with sobs. Memories of the day before flashed through my head. The knowing looks between Mark and Helene, their whispers. Everything took on a horrible meaning now. They had planned this all along. This weekend was just an excuse to lure me away from home and abandon me. After what seemed like an eternity, I managed to regain some semblance of control. I had to act, do something. I couldn't stand there and cry. I took a deep breath and tried to think rationally. I was a lawyer, damn it. I was used to handling difficult situations. Granted, I had never had to deal with anything like this, but I had to keep my cool. The first thing to do was to contact the hotel reception. Maybe they could help me somehow. I grabbed the room phone and dialed the front desk number. "Hello, this is Dormy House Reception. What can I do for you?" a female voice replied. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm in room 203. I have a problem. My things are missing and my husband is gone. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I see. I'll send someone to you right away, madam. Don't move. A few minutes later, there was a knock on my door. She was a woman in her 50s, her grey hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her badge read MME Leroy, Director. Hello, madam, she said softly as she entered the room. I understand you have a problem. I nodded, unable to speak. Tears threatened to fall again. Mrs. Leroy sat next to me on the bed. With a patience and kindness that I will never forget, she listened to me tell the whole story. How Mark and Helene had convinced me to come here, how they had acted normally yesterday, and how I had woken up this morning to find that they had left with all my things. I'm so sorry this happened to you, madam, she said once I was finished. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of situation. Not exactly like this, of course, but people being abandoned by their spouse. It happens more often than you think. She explained to me that there was not much the hotel could do legally. Mark had paid for the room in cash for the entire weekend, so technically I was allowed to stay until Sunday. But after. Listen, she said, taking my hand, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to bring you a few changes of clothes. It won't be much, just some clothes that customers have forgotten and which we're keeping just in case. Then you're going to go down and have a nice breakfast. It'll do you some good. Meanwhile, I'll contact the local police to see what they can do. I nodded, grateful for his kindness. Ms. Leroy returned a few minutes later with jeans, a t-shirt and a sweater. The clothes were a little big for me, but it was better than nothing. Once dressed, I went down to the dining room. Despite my lack of appetite, I forced down a few bites of croissant and drank a coffee. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how I was going to get through this. Mrs. Leroy came back to see me as I finished my coffee. His face was serious. I spoke to the police, she told me softly. Unfortunately, there is not much they can do right away. As you are an adult and you came here of your own free will, they consider that there was no kidnapping or kidnapping. As for to the theft of your belongings, since it was your husband who took them, it's considered a couple's affair. They told me that you should file a complaint once you return to Paris. I felt my heart tighten. I was alone. Really alone. What am I going to do? I whispered, more to myself than to Madame Leroy. She looked at me with compassion. Do you have family or friends who could help you? I thought for a moment. My family was far away, in Brittany. My friends. Most of them were friends of Mark and me. Who would believe me if I told them what happened? Then, suddenly, I thought of Sophie. My best friend since high school. We had lost sight of each other a little in recent years, mainly because of Mark who didn't like her very much. But if anyone could help me, it was her. Yes, I said to Mrs. Leroy. I think I have someone to contact. She smiled at me, relieved. Very good. Use the reception phone to call her. Don't worry about the charges, it's the house's offering. With trembling hands, I dialed Sophie's number. After 3 rings that seemed like an eternity, I heard his familiar voice. Hello, Sophie. It's Sarah. I need help. And there, in the lobby of this hotel in Etretat, surrounded by caring strangers, I burst into tears. Sophie listened to me, shocked but determined to help me. She promised to make an immediate transfer so that I could return to Paris. As I hung up, I felt both empty and strangely determined. This was just the beginning of a long battle, I knew it. But I was going to fight. For my dignity, for my life. I looked out the window, towards the majestic cliffs of Etretat. They had resisted millions of years of erosion, holding firm against the incessant assaults of the sea. And I, too, would hold firm. Whatever happens. Sitting in the lobby of the Dormy House Hotel, I waited for Sophie's transfer to arrive. Every minute seemed to last forever. My mind wavered between disbelief at the situation and a dawning determination to get through it. Madame Leroy, the hotel manager, regularly came to see me, bringing me tea and words of comfort. Around noon, my phone vibrated. A message from my bank informed me that a transfer had been made to my account. Relief washed over me. I now had the means to return to Paris and start rebuilding my life. "That's it," I said to Madame Leroy, who was sitting next to me. "The money has arrived." She smiled warmly at me. "I'm happy for you, madam. What do you plan to do now?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going back to Paris. I have to face this situation head on." Madame Leroy nodded approvingly. "That's a wise decision. But before you go, you might want to buy some clothes and toiletries. There's a little store not far from here that might help you out." I followed his advice. Accompanied by a hotel employee, I went to a small shop in downtown Etretat. I bought the bare essentials: underwear, jeans, a few t-shirts, a sweater, and a light jacket. At a nearby pharmacy, I found a toothbrush, toothpaste, and a few other hygiene essentials. These purchases, although small, gave me a sense of normalcy again. Back at the hotel, I booked a train ticket to Paris. The next departure was at 3:30 p.m. from Le Havre station. Madame Leroy insisted that a member of staff take me to the station. Before leaving, I warmly thanked Madame Leroy and her team for their kindness and support. "You are a strong woman," she said, shaking my hand. "Never forget that. What happened to you is terrible, but you will get through this." His words touched me more than I thought possible. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. The journey to Le Havre station was made in contemplative silence. I watched the Norman landscape pass by, so beautiful and peaceful, in total contrast to the tumult of my emotions. Once on the train, I finally had time to think about everything that had happened. How did we get here? Mark and I had our problems, of course, but to do this to me, and Helene, his mother, who had participated in this cruel plan. How could a mother-in-law hate her daughter-in-law so much? As the train sped toward Paris, I began to mentally retrace the final months of our relationship. Mark's little acerbic remarks, his growing irritation, Helene's increasingly frequent visits. Everything took on a new meaning in the light of what had just happened. My phone vibrated, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. "Are you on your way? I'll be waiting for you at the station. Courage, my dear." This simple message warmed my heart. Despite everything, I was not alone. I still had friends to count on. The train arrived at Saint-Lazare station in the early evening. When I went down to the platform, I immediately spotted Sophie. She stood there, scanning the crowd, a worried look on her face. When our eyes met, she rushed to me and hugged me. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." We stayed like that for a moment, in the middle of the flow of travelers. For the first time since that nightmarish morning, I felt safe. Sophie took me to her place, a cozy little apartment in the 11th arrondissement. She had prepared the sofa bed for me and ordered pizza. "You're going to stay here as long as you need," she told me firmly. "We're going to face this together." That night, lying on Sophie's sofa bed, I cried silently. Tears of sadness, of anger, but also of relief. I had hit rock bottom, of course, but I was back in Paris, surrounded by a friend who supported me. It was a new beginning. The next morning, Sophie and I started to make a plan of action. The first step was to block my bank cards, in case Mark tried to use them. Then we went to the police station to file a theft complaint. The officer who received us was compassionate, but not very optimistic about the outcome that would be given to my complaint. "Unfortunately, madam," he explained to me, "in this type of marital situation, it is often difficult to prove that there has been theft. Your husband could claim that these items belong to him or that you gave him. Despite everything, he registered my complaint." It was a first step, however small. The next step was to contact a family law attorney. Sophie knew someone and managed to get me an appointment for the next day. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Between the meetings with the lawyer, the administrative procedures to change my identity papers, and the search for a new job, I had discovered that Mark had called my office to resign on my behalf. I had little time to feel sorry for myself. Little by little, I began to regain control of my life. Every little step forward was a victory. Each obstacle overcome made me stronger. One evening, about 2 weeks after I returned to Paris, Sophie and I were sitting on her balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. "You know," she told me, "I'm impressed by your strength. A lot of people would have collapsed after what you went through." I smiled weakly. "I don't really have a choice, you know. It's that or let Mark and Helene win." Sophie nodded. "That's true. But you could have taken the easy way out, let yourself be defeated. Instead, you fight. It's admirable." His words made me think. It's true that I was fighting. Every day was a struggle, but I didn't let the situation define me. I was more than what had happened to me. Weeks became months. Little by little, my life began to take on a new shape. I found a new job in a small law firm, less prestigious than my old position, but the atmosphere was warm and the work rewarding. I moved into a tiny studio, barely bigger than a maid's room, but it was home. Mark ended up contacting me, via his lawyer. He wanted a divorce. I was ready. The negotiations were difficult, with Mark trying to deprive me of everything, but my lawyer fought like a lion. In the end, I obtained decent financial compensation for the goods that Mark had stolen from me. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of a chapter in my life, certainly, but also the beginning of a new one. That evening, Sophie insisted on celebrating. We went to a small bar that we often frequented back in high school. Sitting there, surrounded by old friends that Sophie had invited, I realized how much I had changed. I was stronger, more resilient. I had been through hell and I had come out. "To Sarah," Sophie said, raising her glass. "To his strength and his courage." Everyone toasted. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I was grateful for these friends, for this new life I was building. Later that evening, as we walked along the Seine, Sophie asked me, "So, what's your next challenge?" I thought for a moment. "You know what? I think I'm going to go back to school. I've always wanted to specialize in women's rights. I think it's the right time." Sophie smiled at me. "That sounds like you. Always wanting to help others." I shrugged my shoulders. "Let's just say I have some personal experience that might be helpful." We both laughed. It was a light, liberating laugh. A laugh that said that despite everything, life continued. And that she could even be beautiful. That night, when I got home, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a different woman from the one who woke up that fateful morning in Etretat. A stronger, wiser, but also more compassionate woman. A woman who had survived and was ready to face whatever life had in store for her. The road to resilience had been long and difficult. But I had gone through it. And I was proud of the person I had become. Several months had passed since that terrible day in Etretat. My life had taken a new turn. I had resumed my studies as planned, specializing in women's rights. This new challenge gave me a goal, a reason to get up every morning with determination. My days were divided between classes at university and my work at the law firm, where I had obtained a part-time position. One evening, as I came home from a long day of classes, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. Intrigued, I picked up. "Hello," I said, a little suspicious. "Sarah. It's Lucy, the neighbor from your old apartment." My heart sank. Lucy was a charming woman who lived on the same floor as Mark and me. We used to have coffee together from time to time. "Lucy. It's been a long time. How are you?" "Good, good," she replied quickly. "Listen, Sarah, I'm calling you because, well, there's something weird going on at your house." "Well, at Mark's." I felt my stomach drop. "What d? Oh, you mean?" "Well, Mark and his mother came home a few days ago. They seemed, I don't know, nervous. And then today I saw the movers. They were taking away almost all the furniture. I thought maybe you should know." My mind was racing. Were Mark and Helene back? And they were moving? Why now? "Thank you, Lucy," I said in what I hoped was a calm voice. "I appreciate you warning me." After hanging up, I sat still for a long time, trying to digest this information. Part of me wanted to ignore all of this, to leave Mark and his move behind me. But another, stronger part felt that I had to go. I had to see with my own eyes. I called Sophie and explained the situation to her. "Are you sure you want to go?" she asked me, worried. "Yes," I replied with a confidence I only half felt. "I have to do it. To turn the page for good." Sophie insisted on accompanying me. Half an hour later, we were in his car, on the way to my old apartment. The journey took place in tense silence. My mind replayed all the memories linked to this place, good and bad. When we arrived, the street was quiet. There was nothing to suggest what was happening inside the building. We walked up the stairs, my heart beating harder and harder with each step. Arriving on the landing, we saw the apartment door wide open. The sounds of footsteps and moving furniture echoed inside. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The shock left me frozen in place. The apartment, once so familiar, was unrecognizable. Most of the furniture was gone. Those who remained were covered in white sheets, like silent ghosts. The walls, once decorated with our photos and paintings we had chosen together, were bare, revealing lighter rectangles where the frames had protected the painting from the sun. In the middle of this chaos stood Mark, looking haggard. When he saw me, his face went from surprise to anger to a sort of tired resignation. "What are you doing here?" he asked hoarsely. "I heard you were moving," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I wanted to see for myself." Mark laughed, a joyless laugh. "Well, there you go. You saw. Satisfied?" That's when Helene came out of the room. Her face hardened when she saw me. "You," she spat. "How dare you come here?" Sophie, who had remained silent until then, took a step forward. "She has as much right to be here as you do. Even more so, considering what you did to her." Helene opened her mouth to reply, but Mark interrupted her with a gesture. "That's enough, Mom. It's no use." I looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when I noticed something strange. It wasn't just our furniture that was missing. All the valuables seemed to have disappeared. The expensive trinkets that Helene gave us every Christmas, Mark's watch collection, even the old silver service that had belonged to his family for generations. Everything was gone. "What happened?" I asked, curiosity winning out over caution. Mark and Helene exchanged a look, then Mark sighed deeply. "Do you really want to know?" "Very good. After leaving you in Etretat, we went on a trip. We had planned to leave for a few months, while things settled down. But..." He hesitated, glancing at his mother who looked like she was about to explode. "But what?" I insisted. "But we were fooled," Helene finally blurted out, her voice trembling with anger. "These bastards took everything from us." Little by little, the story came out. After abandoning me, Mark and Helene left for Southeast Asia. There, they met a group of people who offered them an incredible investment. Blinded by greed and the excitement of their victory over me, they had invested almost all their savings. Of course it was a scam. By the time they realized it, it was too late. All their money was gone. "We had to sell almost everything we had to pay the debts," Mark concluded, looking dejected. I was stunned. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony of the situation. Another part felt strangely sad for them. "And now?" I asked. "Now we're starting from scratch," Mark replied. "We're going to live with my aunt in the provinces. She has agreed to host us while we get back on our feet." Silence fell again in the apartment. I looked at these two people who had done so much trouble, who had tried to destroy myself, and I no longer felt anger. Just pity, and maybe a little relief. They wanted to punish me, make me suffer, but in the end, it was they who had lost everything. "I'm sorry that it happened like that," I said finally. "And I really thought it." Mark looked at me, surprised. For a moment, I thought I saw a remorse glow in his eyes. But Helene intervened before he could answer. "We don't need your pity," she spit. "Get out here." I nodded. It was time to leave it all behind me once and for all. "Let's go," I said to Sophie. While we headed for the door, I heard Mark calls me. "Sarah." I turned around. I'm sorry. For everything." I supported his gaze for a long time. Then I just nodded and I got out. On the stairs, Sophie took my hand. "Are you doing well?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. I think yes. And it was true. Leaving the building, I felt an immense relief. As if a weight that I did not even know how to wear had just taken away. That evening, sitting on the balcony of my little studio, I thought about everything that had happened. The way my life had changed that morning in Etretat, to everything I had gone through since. And I realized that, despite all the pain and the difficulties, I would not change anything. This experience had made me stronger, more resilient. She had shown me who my real friends were, pushed me to continue my dreams. And above all, she taught me that I was able to overcome anything. Mark and Helene wanted to break me, but they had failed. On the contrary, I was stronger than ever. Ready to face everything that life could reserve for me. With a smile, I raised my glass to the starry sky of Paris. In the future, to resilience, and to the new chances that life offers us when we least expect it. The days that followed my unexpected visit to my old apartment were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between the relief of having finally obtained a form of fence and a strange concern. Despite all that Mark and Helene had made me undergo, I could not help thinking about their current situation. Karmic justice may have struck, but was it really what I wanted? A week after this meeting, when I left college after a particularly intense course on the rights of women victims of domestic violence, my phone vibrated. It was Mark's message. "Can we see each other? I need to talk to you." My first reflex was to refuse. Why should I give him my time after all he had done to me? But a little voice in my head told me that this conversation was perhaps necessary, if only for myself. After thinking for a long time, I replied, "Okay. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., at the Café des Artistes." It was a public place, not too far from my home, where I would feel safe. The next day, I arrived at the café 15 minutes ahead, my heart beating. I chose a table near the window, where I could see the street. At 3 p.m. precisely, I saw Mark arrive. He looked tired, almost aged. When he saw me, he hesitated for a moment before entering. "Hi," he said, sitting in front of me. "Hello, Mark," I replied, trying to keep a neutral voice. An embarrassing silence has settled. Mark looked very where except in my direction. Finally, I decided to break the ice. "Did you want to talk to me?" He took a deep inspiration. "Yes. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not like the other day in the apartment." I felt my throat tighten. These words, I had waited for so long. But now that they were there, I didn't know how to react. "Sarah, what we did to you was horrible. Unforgivable. I was loose, cruel, and I have no excuse." I listened in silence, watching him fight with his words and his emotions. When my mother suggested this plan, I should have said no. I should have defended you. But I was angry, frustrated, and I let these feelings take over. For what? I finally asked. What did I do to deserve this? Mark rocked his head. "You hadn't done anything. It was me. I was jealous of your success, your ambition. I felt insignificant next to you. And my mother did not stop adding, to say that you despised me, that you were going to leave me as soon as you have a better opportunity." I was stunned. All this time, was that jealousy and insecurities fed by his mother? "Mark, I was proud of you. I never thought of leaving you." He had a bitter laugh. "I know now. But at the time, I was blinded by my own fears." We remained silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of these revelations. "And now?" I asked. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to start from scratch. Find a job, anyone to start. And above all, I will distance myself from my mother." I realized how toxical her influence had been. I nodded, enjoying his awareness. "Sarah," he continued, "I know that I don't have the right to ask you anything, but do you think that one day can you forgive me?" This question took me off guard. Forgiveness? Was it even possible after all that had happened? "I don't know, Mark," I answered honestly. "What you did to me, you and your mother broke me. I had to rebuild everything from nothing." He looked down, ashamed. "But," I continued, "I don't want to live with bitterness. It would only hurt me. So maybe with time, I can forgive you. Not for you, but for me." Mark looked up, surprised by my answer. "Thank you," he whispered. "It's already more than what I deserve." While we were on the verge of separating ourselves, a strident voice resounded behind us. "Mark, what are you doing with her?" We turned around to see Helene, standing at the entrance to the coffee, her face distorted by anger. "Mom," said Mark, visibly shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I followed you," she spit. "I knew you were simmering something. And here I am with this bitch." I got up, feeling anger getting into myself. "That's enough, Helene. You have nothing to do here." She approached, threatening. You close it. It's your fault if we are there. If you hadn't bewitched my son." Mark interposed. "Stop, Mom. It's all over. Sarah has nothing to do with our problems. It was we who have spoiled everything." Helene fell, as struck. "How dare you say that? After all that I did for you?" "What you did for me," repeated Mark, incredulous. "You destroyed my wedding, you pushed me to do horrible things, and now we have lost everything because of your crazy ideas." The coffee had become silent, all the customers observing the scene that took place in front of them. Helene, feeling all the eyes on her, seemed to deflate. "Mark, my darling, I just wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" He laughed without joy. "No, Mom. You wanted to control me. And I was stupid enough to let you do it." He turned to me. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was following me." I hosted my head, still in shock from this unexpected confrontation. Helene looked at us in turn, her face from anger to confusion, then to a kind of despair. "What are you going to do now?" she asked Mark in a little voice. "I told you yesterday. I am leaving. I need to distance myself, to think about it all." "But, and me?" she asked, suddenly vulnerable. Mark rocked his head. "You are my mother, and I love you. But I need space. We all need it." He turned to me one last time. "Thank you for listening to me, Sarah. I know it doesn't change anything that happened, but I wanted you to know the truth." I nodded, unable to speak. Mark took his mother by the arm and gently guided him towards the exit. Before leaving, he threw me a last look, mixes regret and gratitude. Once alone, I collapsed on my chair, trembling. This confrontation had been intense, unexpected, but in a way, liberating. The server approached, the air worried. "Everything is fine, madam. Do you want me to call someone?" I shook my head. "No, thank you. It's going to go. I can have a coffee, please?" While I sipped my coffee, trying to digest everything that had just happened, I realized that this confrontation, as difficult as it was perhaps exactly what I needed to definitively turn the page. I released my phone and called Sophie. "Hello," she replied. "Sophie, you will never guess what just happened." While I told him everything, I felt a weight getting up of my shoulders. This chapter of my life was finally closed. I was ready to move forward, stronger and wiser than before. Leaving the coffee, I cast a last look at the table where this confrontation had taken place. A smile on the lips, I took a deep inspiration and I took a step towards my future, definitively leaving the past behind me. The weeks following the confrontation at the coffee were like a new start. Every morning, I woke up with a feeling of lightness that I had not felt for a long time. The anger and bitterness that had been my constant companions in recent months seemed to have dissipated, giving way to an unexpected serenity. My women's law studies took full meaning now. Each course, each case studied resonated in me in a new way. I was no longer just a student, I was a survivor, someone who intimately understood the challenges of this area of law. One day, while I was working on a group project at the library, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Mark. "I am leaving for Marseille. I found a job there. I wanted you to know. Take care of you." I fixed the screen for a long time, not knowing how to react. Finally, I simply replied, "Good luck for this new start." This brief conversation made me realize how much I had advanced. A few months ago, a message from Mark would have upset me. Now it was just information, no more no less. The same evening, I spoke to Sophie around a glass of wine on my little balcony. "How do you feel about that?" she asked me, worried. I thought for a moment before answering. You know what? I feel, well, really. I'm happy that he is trying to start his life away from here. It's better for everyone. Sophie smiled at me. You really went a long way, my beautiful. She was right. The path had been long and difficult, but I was proud of where I arrived. The months have passed. I immersed myself in my studies with a renewed passion. My work in the law firm became more and more rewarding. I had even started to volunteer in an association for aid to women victims of domestic violence. It was there, a rainy Saturday morning, that I met Omely. She had come to seek help, blushed eyes and trembling hands. His story looked so much like mine that I was breathless. He took me everything, she whispered. My money, my business, my dignity. I don't know how to get out of it. I took his hands in mine. Omely, I know it seems impossible now, but you can get out of it. I know it, because I got there. And there, in this small room of the association, I told him my story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. I told him about Etretat, of my nightmare awakening, but also of the strength that I had discovered in me, of the precious help of my friends, of my career to rebuild my life. At the end of my story, Omely looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Do you really think I can get out of it? I'm sure, I replied with conviction. It will not be easy, there will be difficult days, but you are stronger than you think. That day, by helping Omely to establish an action plan, giving her the contacts of lawyers and psychologists, I felt that something changed in me. My experience, as painful as it was, could be used for something. I could use what I had experienced to help other women. In the weeks that followed, I invested myself even more in the association. Every woman I helped, every story I heard reinforced my determination. I only wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to be a change agent. One evening, when I returned from a meeting to the association, I met Lucy, my former neighbor, in the metro. Sarah, she exclaimed. It's been so long. We discussed throughout the journey. I told him what I was doing now, my studies, my work at the association. You know, she told me when we arrived at my station, I am really impressed by what you have accomplished. After what happened, many would have abandoned. His words touched me more than I would have thought it possible. Thank you, Lucy. It was not easy, but I'm proud of where I am today. This fortuitous meeting made me think. I had changed so much since this terrible morning in Etretat. I had gone from victim to survivor, and now I was someone who helped others survive. A few days later, I received an unexpected email. It was from a publishing house. Apparently, someone from the association had told them about my story and my work. They wanted to know if I was interested in writing a book on my experience and how I had rebuilt my life. The idea first frightened me. Write a book. Explain my story to the whole world. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was an incredible opportunity. Not for me, but for all the women who were in the situation where I had been. After having discussed it for a long time with Sophie and my colleagues from the association, I accepted. The following months were intense, divided between my studies, my work in the office, the association, and the writing of the book. Every evening, I sat down in front of my computer and I let the words flow. It was sometimes painful to relive certain moments, but it was also incredibly liberating. The day of the launch of the book arrived faster than I would have believed it. Standing in front of a room filled with journalists, members of the association and friends, I took a deep inspiration before starting my speech. 2 years ago, I said, I woke up in a hotel room in Etretat, alone and stripped of everything. That day, I thought my life was over. But today, Hui, I'm here to tell you that it was just the beginning. I saw Sophie in the crowd, tears in my eyes, encouraging me with a sign of head. This book is not only my story. It is the story of all women who have been betrayed, abandoned, mistreated. It is a testimony to our resilience, our strength. But it is also a call to action. The applause that followed were deafening. While I signed copies of the book, I saw Omely approach. She looked transformed, confident and smiling. Your book will change lives, she told me, hugging me. You have already changed mine. That evening, back in my little apartment, I thought back to the whole path traveled. From this hotel room in Etretat to this launch room, I had crossed hell, but I was out of it. I opened my computer and I started writing an email. Dear Mark, I don't know if you will read this message, but I wanted to let you know that my book was released today. It is not a message of reproach or anger. It's just to tell you that despite everything, I managed to rebuild my life. I hope you found your way in Marseille. I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. Because this forgiveness is the last step of my healing. Take care of yourself. Sarah. I pressed send without hesitation. Then I headed for my balcony, a glass of wine in hand. The sun was sleeping in Paris, bathing the city with a golden glow. I thought of all the women who read my book, the ones I would help in my future specialized law firm. The path to redemption had been long and difficult. But he had led me exactly where I was to be. And for the first time for a long time, I was impatient to see what the future had in store for me.